Sign this or watch your family rot in debtor's prison. Elena Whitford stared at the contract that would steal her life. A marriage to a man she'd never met. A duke wrapped in ice and secrets. Her father's signature was already dry on the page. Hers was the only thing missing. She had 72 hours to decide. Become a stranger's wife or let everyone she loved pay the price of his desperation. But Elena Whitford didn't break easy. And neither, she would learn, did Alexander Graves. Stay until the end to see how she turned a trap into power. Drop a like and comment your city below. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Elena would remember that detail later, when everything else blurred together. The sound of her mother's sobbing, the sharp crack of porcelain hitting the floor, the way the afternoon light cut through the dust in their cramped sitting room like it was trying to expose every broken thing they owned. She held the envelope in her hands, heavy cream paper with a wax seal she didn't recognize. Her name was written across the front in lettering so perfect it looked like it had been carved rather than written. Miss Elena Whitford. Not Ms. Not Dear Elena. Just her name. Clinical and final. Don't open it. Her mother's voice came from the doorway, thin and cracked. Margaret Whitford had always been small, but grief had made her smaller. 4 months since the funeral, and she still wore black. Still moved through the house like a ghost, visiting the scene of her own haunting. It's addressed to me, Elena said. I know what it is. Elena looked up. Her mother's face was bloodless. Then tell me. Margaret's hands twisted in her apron. Your father... Her voice broke. She tried again. Your father made arrangements before he died. The room went cold. Elena broke the seal. The letter inside was short, brutally short. Legal language wrapped around a nightmare. Contractual obligation, binding agreement, marriage arrangement. Duke Alexander Graves. Default results in seizure of property and criminal prosecution for fraud and debt evasion. She read it twice, then a third time because her brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. He sold me. He was trying to save us, her mother whispered. He sold me to a duke. Elena's laugh came out wrong, sharp and bitter. To a man I've never met, never even heard of. The debts were... Elena, you don't understand how bad it was. Your father, he couldn't... So he traded his daughter instead. The words hung in the air between them, ugly and true. Margaret flinched. There was no other way. After the business failed, after the creditors started circling, Alexander Graves offered him a solution: money to clear the debts, protection from prosecution. All he wanted in return was a wife. Elena's hands were shaking. She set the letter down before she tore it in half. A transaction. A marriage. Same thing, apparently. Her mother crossed the room, reaching for her, but Elena stepped back. She couldn't be touched right now. If someone touched her, she'd shatter. How long have you known? Margaret's silence was its own answer. How? Long. Since the week before he died. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. You watched me grieve him. You let me cry over his grave, and the whole time you knew he'd... She couldn't finish. Couldn't find words big enough for this betrayal. He made me promise not to tell you until after the mourning period ended. He thought... Margaret's voice splintered. He thought if you had time, you might understand, might see that he did it for us. For us, Elena repeated flatly. Right, because signing away your daughter's entire future is such a loving gesture. Don't be cruel. I'm not the one who was cruel. The shout echoed off the walls. Elena had never raised her voice to her mother before. She'd been the good daughter, the obedient one, the girl who'd held the house together after her father's business collapsed, who'd sold her jewelry to pay for food, who'd learned to make a single chicken last a week. And this was her reward. Margaret was crying now, quiet tears that tracked through the powder on her cheeks. If you refuse, they'll come for us. The contract includes a clause. If you don't fulfill the terms, your father's debts transfer to his estate. To me, I'll be arrested for fraud, Elena. I'll go to prison. That's not legal. It is when the contract is witnessed by a magistrate and signed in good faith. Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper. He'll make it legal, the Duke. Men like that, they don't need the law on their side. They are the law. Elena turned to the window. Outside, rain had started to fall, turning the street to mud. Their neighborhood had been respectable once. Before the collapse, before her father's desperate gambles and bad investments had burned through the family fortune like paper. Now they lived in 3 rooms above a tailor's shop, and even that was borrowed kindness from a creditor who hadn't yet decided to collect. "What's he like?" she asked. "The Duke." "I don't know. Your father met with him once, maybe twice. He said—" Margaret hesitated. "He said the Duke was fair. Honorable. Honorable men don't buy wives. He didn't buy you. It's an arrangement, a marriage contract." Elena laughed again, that same broken sound. "You really believe there's a difference?" Before her mother could answer, someone knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps. Purposeful. Not the knock of a neighbor or a creditor. This was the knock of someone used to having doors opened for them immediately. Margaret went pale. "He wasn't supposed to come for another 2 days." "Who?" "The Duke's representative. The letter said—" The knocking came again, harder. Elena straightened her shoulders. Whatever was coming, she'd meet it standing up. She opened the door. The man on the other side was tall, gray-haired, wearing a coat that probably cost more than everything Elena owned combined. He looked her over once, clinical and thorough, then gave a small bow. "Miss Whitford, I am Henry Carstairs, solicitor to His Grace, the Duke of Ashton. I've come to discuss the terms of your contract." "There's nothing to discuss." His expression didn't change. "Nevertheless, may I come in?" Elena wanted to slam the door in his face. Wanted to tell him to take his Duke and his contract and throw them both into the Thames. But her mother was watching from across the room, eyes wide with fear, and Elena could already hear the threat in the silence. Refuse, and she goes to prison. She stepped aside. Carstairs entered like he owned the place, which, Elena realized bitterly, his employer probably did. Everything in this city was owned by someone with more money and fewer morals. He set a leather portfolio on their scarred dining table and opened it with practiced efficiency. "I'll be brief, Miss Whitford. The Duke has reviewed the contract your father executed. He finds the terms acceptable." "How generous of him." Carstairs ignored the sarcasm. "The marriage will take place in 6 weeks. You will reside at Ashton Hall during the engagement period to—" "6 weeks?" Elena's voice cracked. "I get 6 weeks to prepare for a lifetime sentence?" "To allow you both to become acquainted before the ceremony," Carstairs continued smoothly. "His Grace believes the period of adjustment will make the transition easier for all parties. I'm not a piece of furniture being moved between houses." "Of course not." The solicitor's tone suggested he thought exactly that. "However, the Duke is a busy man with significant responsibilities. He requires a wife who can fulfill certain social and administrative duties. The engagement period will serve as an evaluation." An evaluation. Elena felt her temper rising, hot and dangerous. "And if I fail his little test, does he send me back, get a refund?" Carstairs finally looked at her directly. His eyes were cold. "If you prove unsuitable, the contract stipulates alternative arrangements. The debt would still be cleared, but your mother would be required to sign a legal waiver accepting financial responsibility for any outstanding—" "Stop!" Margaret's voice was barely audible. "Please." Elena's hands curled into fists. She understood now. This wasn't just about her. It was about making sure there was no way out, no escape clause, no loophole. Refuse the Duke, and her mother paid. Fail to be a good enough wife, and her mother paid. Every route led to the same destination, Elena Whitford, property of Alexander Graves, whether she wanted it or not. "What kind of man arranges a marriage like this?" she asked quietly. "What kind of person treats another human being like a business transaction?" Carstairs began gathering his papers. "The Duke is a practical man, Miss Whitford. He needs a wife. Your father needed money. The arrangement benefits both parties." "I'm not a party. I'm a prisoner." "You are," he said, snapping his portfolio closed. "Whatever the contract says you are. The carriage will arrive Thursday morning at 9. I suggest you be ready." He left without waiting for a response. Elena stood in the middle of the room, feeling the walls close in. 6 weeks. She had 6 weeks before her life became someone else's possession. Her mother was crying again, but Elena couldn't comfort her, couldn't move. All she could think about was the letter, the elegant handwriting, the impersonal language, the cold, mechanical precision of a trap designed to look like salvation. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at her father's old desk and read the contract. Every word, every clause. Looking for something, anything that might give her leverage. She found it on page 7. The arrangement shall be deemed valid upon completion of a trial engagement period, during which both parties reserve the right to dissolve the contract by mutual agreement, provided such dissolution occurs before the marriage ceremony and is accompanied by written documentation of irreconcilable incompatibility. Mutual agreement. It was a small crack in an otherwise impenetrable wall, but it was there. If she could convince the Duke that they were incompatible, if she could make him want to end this as badly as she did, maybe there was a way out. Maybe she could save her mother without sacrificing herself. It was a long shot, a desperate, probably doomed long shot. But it was the only shot she had. Elena pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Your Grace, I have received your contract and your solicitor's terms. I will not pretend to be grateful for this arrangement, nor will I pretend that I consider it anything other than what it is, a transaction built on my father's desperation and your convenience. However, I am not a fool. I understand the consequences of refusal. Therefore, I accept your terms, with one addition. You want 6 weeks to evaluate whether I am suitable. I want the same. 6 weeks to determine whether you are someone I can tolerate binding my life to. If, at the end of that period, we both agree that this arrangement is untenable, you will release me from the contract and clear my family's debts as originally promised. I will require this amendment in writing, signed by both parties and witnessed by your solicitor. I will not spend the rest of my life married to a stranger who sees me as furniture. You want a wife who can fulfill social and administrative duties? Prove to me that you're a husband worth having those duties for. Consider this your own evaluation period. Respectfully, Elena Whitford. She sealed the letter before she could second-guess herself and left it on the table for the morning post. Then she went to her room, pulled out the single trunk she owned, and began to pack. Thursday came faster than she wanted. The carriage arrived exactly at 9, black lacquer and gold trim, drawn by 4 matched horses that probably ate better than most people in Elena's neighborhood. The driver wore livery that looked freshly pressed. Everything about it screamed wealth and power and the kind of life where people were commodities. Her mother helped her load the trunk, hands shaking. "Write to me," Margaret whispered. "Please, let me know you're safe." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "And Elena?" Her mother gripped her hand. "Try. Please try to make this work. I know you're angry. I know this isn't what you wanted, but I'll do what I have to do," Elena said. "That's all I can promise." She climbed into the carriage before her mother could see her cry. The ride to Ashton Hall took 4 hours. 4 hours of watching the city give way to countryside, the buildings growing larger and farther apart, the roads smoother and better maintained. 4 hours of silence except for the sound of wheels on gravel and her own racing thoughts. She'd expected something impressive. The Duke's estate would obviously be grand. Men like that didn't live in modest homes. But nothing prepared her for Ashton Hall. It rose out of the landscape like something from a painting. Gray stone and tall windows, wings spreading out on either side of a central structure that had to be at least 3 stories high. Gardens that looked like they required an army to maintain. Fountains, statues, a circular drive that could fit 20 carriages. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress. The carriage stopped at the main entrance. A butler materialized before Elena could even reach for the door handle, opening it with a slight bow. "Miss Whitford, welcome to Ashton Hall. His Grace is expecting you." She followed him inside, trying not to stare. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, paintings on the walls that were probably worth more than her father's entire failed business. Everything was spotless, polished, perfect, and cold. Even with the afternoon sun pouring through the windows, the place felt cold. The butler led her through a maze of corridors to a set of double doors carved with some kind of family crest. He knocked once, then pushed them open. "Miss Elena Whitford, Your Grace." The man behind the desk didn't look up immediately. He was reading something. A letter, Elena realized. Her letter. The one she'd sent 3 days ago. When he finally raised his head, she got her first real look at the Duke of Ashton. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair, severe features, eyes the color of slate in winter. Handsome in the way sharp things are handsome. All edges and angles and the suggestion of something dangerous underneath. He looked at her the way someone might look at a contract they were reviewing. Analytical, detached. Miss Whitford. His voice matched his appearance. Low, controlled, with the kind of accent that came from expensive schools and careful breeding. Your Grace. She didn't curtsy. Wasn't sure she could without it looking like mockery. He set her letter down. Your addition to our agreement is unconventional. So is buying a wife. Something flickered across his face. Not quite amusement, not quite annoyance. I didn't buy you. No, you just bought my father's debts and took me as collateral. Your father offered the arrangement. I merely accepted. Semantics. Precision. He stood, and Elena realized he was tall, probably 6 feet, maybe more, the kind of height that was used to looking down at people. Words matter, Miss Whitford. The difference between a purchase and a contract is significant. Not from where I'm standing. He walked around the desk, studying her. Elena forced herself to hold still, to meet his gaze without flinching. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her intimidated. You want me to prove I'm worth marrying, he said. That's what your letter suggested. That's what it demanded. You're not in a position to make demands. Neither are you. Elena lifted her chin. You need a wife who can handle your social obligations. I need to know I'm not binding myself to a tyrant. We both have something to prove. Unless you'd prefer to spend 6 weeks with someone who resents you and the rest of your life with a wife who despises you. Silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, the Duke smiled. It didn't reach his eyes, but it shifted something in his expression. Fair enough. He returned to his desk, pulled out a sheet of paper, and began writing. 6 weeks. At the end, if we both agree this arrangement is impossible, I'll release you from the contract and clear your family's debts. Your mother will face no legal or financial consequences. Agreed? Elena blinked. She'd expected him to argue, to refuse, to remind her of her place. You're agreeing? I'm amending the contract. He signed the document with a flourish, then pushed it across the desk. I have no interest in marrying someone who will make both our lives miserable. If you can't tolerate me, better to know now. She stared at the paper. It was everything she'd asked for, written in the same precise legal language as the original contract. Why? She asked quietly. Why agree to this? Alexander Graves looked at her, and for just a moment, something human crossed his face. Something tired. Because I've already had one marriage built on lies and resentment, he said. I won't repeat that mistake. Elena picked up the pen and signed. The butler showed her to her rooms, plural, because apparently even guests at Ashton Hall required a bedroom, sitting room, and private bath. The luxury was overwhelming. The loneliness was worse. That first night, Elena lay in a bed softer than clouds and stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened in the span of 72 hours. She'd gone from daughter to commodity, from grieving to engaged, from a cramped room above a tailor shop to a suite in a palace, and she still had no idea who Alexander Graves actually was. Beyond the cold authority he wore like armor, but she had 6 weeks. 6 weeks to figure out whether the man behind the title was someone she could survive being tied to. 6 weeks to find the cracks in his control. 6 weeks to turn a trap into something she could live with, or 6 weeks to find a way out. Either way, Elena Whitford wasn't going down without a fight. Outside her window, the estate stretched into darkness, vast and imposing. Somewhere in this fortress was a man who thought he could evaluate her worthiness like she was being interviewed for employment. She'd show him exactly what he'd gotten himself into, and if he couldn't handle her at her most difficult, then maybe, just maybe, he'd decide this arrangement wasn't worth the trouble after all. That was the plan, anyway. Elena closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow the real test would begin. Breakfast at Ashton Hall was served at 7:30 sharp. Elena learned this when a maid knocked on her door at 6:45, informing her in a polite but firm tone that His Grace expected punctuality at meals. No exceptions. She showed up at 7:32, still fastening the buttons on a dress she'd owned for 3 years, refusing to wear any of the elaborate gowns someone had helpfully hung in her wardrobe overnight. Alexander was already seated at the head of a table long enough to host a banquet. He glanced up from his newspaper, noted her lateness with a flick of his eyes to the clock on the mantel, and returned to reading without comment. Elena sat down at the opposite end, 20 feet of polished mahogany between them. A footman appeared instantly, setting a plate of food in front of her that looked like it had been arranged by an artist. Eggs perfectly poached, toast cut into precise triangles, fresh berries that probably cost more than her mother spent on groceries in a week. She picked up her fork. Is this how we're going to do this? Do what? Alexander didn't look up from his paper. Pretend the other person doesn't exist. I'm not pretending you don't exist. I'm eating breakfast. At opposite ends of a table designed for 30 people. He turned a page. The dining arrangements are traditional. They're ridiculous. Then feel free to sit closer. Elena stabbed at her eggs. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of moving. If he wanted to have a conversation, he could close the distance himself. They ate in silence. The only sounds were silverware against china and the occasional rustle of newspaper. Finally, Alexander folded the paper and set it aside. You'll meet with Mrs. Donnelly this morning at 9. She manages the household staff. You'll need to understand how the estate runs. I'm not here to run your estate. If you marry me, you will be the Duchess of Ashton. Managing the household is part of that role. If I marry you, Elena corrected, we have 6 weeks, remember? I haven't agreed to anything permanent. Neither have I. The words hung there, sharp and unexpected. Elena looked at him properly for the first time that morning. He was dressed like he was about to attend Parliament, dark suit, crisp collar, everything precisely in place. But there was something in his expression that suggested he'd slept about as well as she had. Mrs. Donnelly at 9, he continued. After that, you're expected at the garden party at 2. What garden party? Lady Ashford is hosting. She's eager to meet you. His tone suggested this was not a good thing. And you want me to go? I want you to understand what you're walking into. Lady Ashford is one of the most influential women in society. She'll ask invasive questions, make subtle judgments, and report everything back to her network of equally judgmental friends. If you can't handle an afternoon of polite hostility, you won't survive a season as my wife. Elena set down her fork carefully. You think I can't handle a bunch of wealthy women gossiping about me? I think you've never experienced this particular brand of cruelty. These aren't creditors making threats. They'll smile while they destroy you. Then maybe you should come with me. I have business in town. Of course you do. Alexander stood, brushing invisible lint from his jacket. The carriage will be ready at 1:30. Wear something appropriate. I'll wear what I have. What you have will mark you as an outsider immediately. I am an outsider. He paused at the doorway, looking back at her. Yes, you are. The question is whether you want to remain one. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone at the enormous table with half-eaten eggs and a growing sense that she'd just lost the first round of whatever game they were playing. Mrs. Donnelly turned out to be a gray-haired woman with the posture of a general and eyes that missed nothing. She led Elena through the estate like she was conducting an inspection, pointing out rooms and explaining functions in a tone that suggested she didn't expect any of this information to stick. The formal drawing room is for receiving important guests. The informal drawing room is for family. The music room is currently unused, as His Grace does not entertain. The library is private. You'll need permission before entering. The East Wing is His Grace's personal quarters. You are not to enter without invitation. Elena stopped walking. I'm sorry, what? Mrs. Donnelly turned, one eyebrow raised. His Grace values his privacy. He values it enough to ban his future wife from an entire wing of the house? Those have been the standing orders since the previous Duchess. The words dropped like stones. There was a previous Duchess. Mrs. Donnelly's expression went carefully blank. That's not my place to discuss, Miss Whitford. Now, If you'll follow me, I'll show you the kitchens. But Elena wasn't moving. What happened to her? Miss Whitford, did she die? Leave? What? The housekeeper's jaw tightened. She left 3 years ago. The marriage was annulled. That's all I'm permitted to say. Permitted by who? Him? By common sense and my desire to remain employed. Mrs. Donnelly's voice dropped. If you want to know about her Grace's past, ask him yourself. But I'd suggest waiting until you've been here longer than 12 hours. The tour continued, but Elena barely heard it. Her mind was stuck on that one detail. Alexander had been married before. The marriage had ended badly enough that he'd banned his future wife from half the house and ordered his staff not to discuss it. And he hadn't thought to mention this before she'd signed the amendment to their contract. By the time Elena climbed into the carriage for Lady Ashford's garden party, she was spoiling for a fight. Unfortunately, Alexander wasn't there to have it with. The party was exactly as bad as he'd predicted. Lady Ashford greeted her with a smile so sweet it could cause tooth decay and eyes so cold they could freeze water. She was older, probably mid-50s, wearing enough jewelry to fund a small country and carrying herself like royalty. Miss Whitford, how delightful to finally meet you. We've all been so curious about the Duke's sudden engagement. Sudden. Elena accepted a glass of champagne from a passing servant. We've been planning this for weeks. Of course, of course. It's just that Alexander is usually so private about his personal affairs. After what happened with Catherine, well, Lady Ashford's smile sharpened. We all understand why he'd be cautious. There was that name again. Catherine, the previous Duchess who'd been erased from the house like she'd never existed. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Elena said, keeping her voice light. Oh, you sweet thing, you really don't, do you? Lady Ashford patted her arm with false sympathy. Well, I suppose you'll learn soon enough. These things always come out eventually. She drifted away, leaving Elena standing alone with her champagne and a growing sense of unease. The rest of the party was variations on the same theme. Women in expensive dresses asking pointed questions while pretending to be friendly. Where had she come from? What did her family do? Had she and the Duke known each other long? Wasn't it unusual for someone of her background to be marrying into such an important family? Elena answered as little as possible, smiled when required, and counted the minutes until she could leave. She was standing by the garden fountain, seriously considering just walking back to the estate on foot, when a woman around her own age approached. You look like you're planning an escape. Elena turned. The woman was tall, red-haired, wearing a green dress that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe, but somehow made it look effortless. She was also the first person all afternoon who'd smiled at Elena, like she meant it. That obvious? Only to someone who's been in your position. The woman extended her hand. Victoria Hartley. I married into this circus 2 years ago. Still haven't figured out all the rules. Elena shook her hand. Elena Whitford. Oh, I know who you are. Everyone here knows who you are. You're all they've been talking about for the past hour. Let me guess, they're being kind and welcoming. Victoria laughed. They're being exactly what you'd expect from people who think breeding and bank accounts are the same as character. She lowered her voice. Between us, most of them are terrified of Alexander. He's too rich, too powerful, and too willing to destroy anyone who crosses him. The fact that he's marrying someone they can't control has them all in a panic. I'm not interested in controlling anyone. That's what makes you dangerous. Victoria linked her arm through Elena's. Come on. Let me introduce you to the only other people here worth talking to. We'll get you through this, and then you can go home and throw things at walls like the rest of us do after these events. Elena let herself be pulled into a small group of younger women who turned out to be infinitely more tolerable than the rest of the party. They asked normal questions, laughed at Victoria's jokes, and didn't once mention Catherine or make veiled comments about Elena's suitability. By the time the carriage came to collect her at 5, Elena felt like she'd survived a battle. The feeling lasted until she walked into the estate and found Alexander waiting in the entrance hall. How was the party? He asked. Educational. That bad? Your friend Lady Ashford is a nightmare. She's not my friend, she's a necessary evil. He studied her face. What did she say? Mostly variations on, "You're not good enough for him," with a side of, "This will end in disaster." Elena pulled off her gloves. She also mentioned Catherine multiple times. Alexander went very still. "Who is she?" Elena asked. "Your housekeeper wouldn't tell me. Lady Ashford was thrilled to drop hints, but not actual information. So I'm asking you directly. Who is Catherine, and why does everyone think I should know about her?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he turned and walked toward his study. "Come with me." She followed him through the halls to the same office where they'd first met. He closed the door behind them, poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if she wanted one, and handed her one before downing his own in a single swallow. "Catherine was my wife. I figured that part out. We were married for 2 years. The marriage was a disaster from the first month." He refilled his glass. "She was the daughter of an earl. Beautiful, charming, exactly what everyone expected a duchess to be. The wedding was a spectacle, 600 guests. The king sent a representative." Elena sat down slowly. "What happened?" "She was sleeping with my business partner." His voice was flat, emotionless. "For most of our marriage, apparently. I found out when I came home early from a trip and caught them in my bed. Alexander, I had the marriage annulled, quietly. No scandal, no public humiliation, just a quiet legal dissolution and a very generous settlement in exchange for her silence." He looked at Elena directly. "Everyone knows, anyway. This world doesn't keep secrets. It just pretends to." Elena took a drink. The whiskey burned. "Is that why you agreed to my contract amendment? Because you've already had one marriage blow up?" "That's part of it." "What's the other part?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't trust easily, Miss Whitford. The people in my world, they want things from me. Money, status, connections. It's always a transaction, always. And I'm tired of pretending it's anything else." "So you arranged a transaction you could control?" "Yes." Elena set down her glass. "You know what the worst part is? I actually understand that." He looked surprised. "You do?" "My father spent his whole life trying to be something he wasn't. Borrowed money he couldn't repay to maintain appearances, made promises he couldn't keep, and when it all fell apart, he sold me to save himself." She met Alexander's eyes. "At least you're honest about what this is. A business arrangement. Between 2 people who don't trust anyone. Essentially." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the room in shades of amber and gold. "For what it's worth," Elena said finally, "I'm sorry she did that to you. And I'm sorry your father put you in this position. So what do we do now?" Alexander smiled slightly. "We have 6 weeks to figure out if 2 damaged people can build something that doesn't destroy them both." "That's a terrible sales pitch for marriage." "I'm aware." Elena stood. "I'm going to go change for dinner. Try not to evaluate my worthiness too harshly based on my table manners." "I'll do my best." She was at the door when he spoke again. "Elena." She turned. It was the first time he'd used her first name. "You handled Lady Ashford well today, better than most would have." "How do you know? You weren't there." "I have sources." At her expression, he shrugged. "I told you. This world doesn't keep secrets. I make it my business to know what people are saying." "That's not creepy at all." "It's survival." Elena left before he could see her smile. Dinner that night was different. Alexander sat at the head of the table still, but Elena sat 3 chairs down instead of at the opposite end, close enough to talk, far enough to retreat if needed. They discussed the estate, the upcoming social season, the logistics of managing properties across 3 counties. Nothing personal, nothing deep, but it was conversation, which was more than they'd managed at breakfast. The next few days fell into a pattern. Mornings, Elena met with Mrs. Donnelly and learned the impossible complexity of running a house with 40 servants, 3 kitchens, and enough rooms to get lost in. She reviewed menus, approved budgets, and tried not to think about the fact that she was learning to manage a small empire when 6 months ago she'd been stretching a single chicken across 4 meals. Afternoons, she either attended social events where wealthy women smiled with their mouths and judged with their eyes, where she explored the estate grounds. The gardens were massive, formal sections with geometric precision, wild sections that looked like nature had been allowed to do whatever it wanted, and everything in between. She found a library in the West Wing that no one had mentioned, dusty, neglected, but full of books that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. She started spending her free hours there, reading and trying to understand the man who owned all of this, but seemed to take pleasure in none of it. Evenings, she and Alexander had dinner. The conversations grew longer, less guarded. He told her about his work, investments, properties, political maneuvering. She told him about her life before, carefully editing out the worst parts. They were circling each other, she realized, testing boundaries, looking for weaknesses. It was during their 10th dinner that things shifted. "I need to attend a function tomorrow night," Alexander said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "A charity gala. I'd like you to come with me." Elena looked up. "As what? Your fiancé?" "As my guest. We'll be seen together publicly for the first time. It will generate talk." Everything generates talk. This will generate the kind of talk that matters. People will be watching how we interact, making judgments. Those judgments will follow us for years. No pressure, then. "I'm not asking you to perform, Elena. I'm asking you to be yourself." He paused, which, based on the last week and a half, should be more than sufficient to make an impression. She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult. The gala was being held at one of London's most prestigious hotels. Black tie, 500 guests. The kind of event where fortunes were made or destroyed based on who talked to whom. Elena spent 3 hours getting ready, with the help of a maid who seemed personally offended by Elena's hair, and a dressmaker who'd been summoned to make emergency alterations to one of the gowns in her wardrobe. When she finally came downstairs, Alexander was waiting in the entrance hall. He looked at her for a long moment. "You look acceptable?" "I was going to say formidable." The hotel was everything Elena expected and worse. Crystal chandeliers, orchestra music, people dripping with diamonds and old money, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about anything as vulgar as survival. Alexander guided her through the crowd with a hand at her elbow, introducing her to an endless stream of lords and ladies and business associates whose names she forgot immediately. Everyone stared, some whispered. A few were bold enough to ask direct questions about their engagement, which Alexander deflected with practiced ease. Elena smiled until her face hurt and tried to remember that she'd survived worse than this. They were standing by the bar, taking a brief break from the onslaught, when a woman approached. She was stunning, blonde, elegant, wearing a dress that probably cost more than some people's houses. She looked at Elena with the kind of casual assessment that made Elena's skin crawl. Then she turned to Alexander and smiled. "Alexander, how wonderful to see you." His entire body went rigid. "Catherine." Elena's stomach dropped. This was her. The previous Duchess. The woman who destroyed Alexander's ability to trust anyone. And she was looking at Elena like she was something amusing. "You must be the new fiancée. How delightful." Catherine's voice was honey over glass. "I'm so glad Alexander found someone willing to take on the challenge." "Challenge?" Elena kept her voice level. "Of marrying someone so emotionally unavailable. I tried for 2 years and never got close." She sipped her champagne. "But perhaps you'll have better luck. You seem determined." Alexander's hand tightened on Elena's elbow. "Catherine, this isn't the time. Oh, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to meet the woman brave enough to try again." She leaned closer to Elena, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "A word of advice, darling. He'll never love you. He's not capable of it. Best to know that going in." Then she drifted away, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and carefully aimed poison. Elena felt Alexander trembling beside her, not with fear, with rage. "We're leaving," he said quietly. "No." He looked at her, surprised. "We're not leaving," Elena said firmly. That's what she wants, to prove she still has power over you, to show everyone here that she can make you run. "Elena, I didn't survive Lady Ashford's garden party just to let your ex-wife chase me out of a gala." She took his arm, deliberately positioning them where Catherine could see. "We're staying, we're dancing, we're showing every person in this room that she doesn't matter." "You don't understand what you're asking." Then explain it to me later. Right now, we're dancing. She pulled him onto the dance floor before he could argue. The orchestra was playing something slow. Elena had never been a good dancer, but Alexander led with the kind of automatic precision that suggested years of practice. They moved through the crowd, and she could feel every eye on them. She's watching, Elena said quietly. I know. Good. Let her watch. Elena looked up at him. You said you wanted to see if I could handle this world. This is me handling it. Something shifted in his expression. The rage was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that might have been respect. You're not what I expected, he said. Neither are you. They finished the dance in silence. When it ended, Alexander didn't let go of her hand immediately. Thank you, he said. For what? For not running. Elena squeezed his hand once. I told you, I don't run easily. They stayed another hour, made conversation, smiled for the cameras, presented a united front. When they finally left, climbing into the carriage for the ride back to the estate, Elena felt exhausted down to her bones. That was brutal, she said. Yes. Does it ever get easier? No, you just get better at hiding how much it costs you. Elena leaned her head back against the seat. That's depressing. That's reality. They rode in silence for a while. Then Alexander spoke again. What she said to you about me being emotionally unavailable. You don't have to. It's true. Mostly. He stared out the window. After Catherine, I decided it was easier not to feel anything. Safer. People can't hurt you if you don't let them in. That's not living. That's just existing. Perhaps. Elena turned to look at him. His profile was sharp in the dim light of the carriage lamps. For what it's worth, I don't think you're incapable of love. I think you're afraid of it. There's a difference. He didn't respond, but his hand, resting on the seat between them, moved slightly closer to hers. Not touching, but not pulling away either. It was the smallest gesture, almost nothing. But Elena felt it like an earthquake. When they arrived back at the estate, Alexander walked her to her door. Tomorrow, he said, I'd like to show you something, if you're willing. Show me what? The part of the estate no one else sees, the part that matters. Elena studied his face. Whatever he was offering, it was important. All right. He nodded once and turned to leave. Alexander. He stopped. Tonight, at the gala, you could have handled Catherine on your own. You didn't need me. I know. Then why did it feel like you did? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked back at her and his expression was more open than she'd ever seen it. Because, for the first time in 3 years, I didn't want to face something alone. He left before she could respond. Elena went to bed that night with her mind racing. Something had shifted between them. Some wall had cracked. She didn't know if that was good or dangerous. Maybe both. The next morning, Alexander was waiting for her after breakfast. He was dressed casually, no suit, just plain clothes that made him look younger and less like a duke. Ready? He asked. For what? You'll see. He led her through the estate to a part of the ground she hadn't explored yet, past the formal gardens, beyond the wild sections, through a gate that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. On the other side was a stable, not the fancy stable where the carriage horses were kept. This was smaller, older, with paint peeling off the doors and ivy growing up the walls. Inside were horses, not show horses or carriage horses. These were working animals, strong, scarred, some of them clearly past their prime. I rescue them, Alexander said quietly. Horses that have been worked too hard, abused, abandoned. I bring them here. Let them recover. Find them new homes if possible. Keep them if not. Elena stared at him. You rescue horses? It's not public knowledge. People would think it's sentimental, weak. He walked over to one of the stalls where a gray mare with a pronounced limp watched him warily. This is Ash. Someone used her for racing until she broke her leg. Then they were going to put her down. I bought her instead. The horse lowered her head, letting Alexander stroke her nose. She's been here 2 years. The leg healed wrong. She'll always limp. But she's safe. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. This man, who presented himself as cold and calculating, who'd built walls around every vulnerable part of himself, spent his private time saving broken animals. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. Alexander kept his eyes on the horse. "Because if we're going to do this, if we're going to try to make something real out of this arrangement, you should know who I actually am. Not the Duke, not the businessman, just me. The man who saves things no one else thinks are worth saving." Something like that. Elena walked over to stand beside him. Ash shifted nervously, but didn't pull away. "Can I tell you something?" Elena said. "About why I'm really here? You're here because of the contract. I'm here because I had no choice. But I stayed. I'm trying to make this work, because I'm tired of being the thing people use and throw away." She looked at him. "My father used me to save himself. Your world looks at me and sees someone who doesn't belong. Even my mother. She loves me, but she needed me to sacrifice myself for her." "Elena, let me finish." She took a breath. "You asked me to prove I can handle being your wife. But what I really need is to know that I'm not just another thing you're acquiring, another piece of your empire. I need to know that if I choose this, I'm choosing something real." Alexander turned to face her fully. They were standing close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. "I can't promise I won't hurt you," he said. "I'm not good at this, at being vulnerable, at trusting. Neither am I. But I can promise I'll try, and I can promise you'll never be something I just use and discard." His hand came up, hesitating, then gently touched her cheek. "You're not a transaction to me anymore, Elena. I'm not sure when that changed, but it did." Her breath caught. Then from somewhere behind them, someone cleared their throat. They jumped apart like they'd been burned. One of the stable hands was standing in the doorway, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Your Grace, apologies for the interruption, but Mr. Carstairs is here. He says it's urgent." Alexander's expression shifted instantly, walls slamming back up. "Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. The stable hand left. Elena tried to catch Alexander's eye, but he was already moving toward the door. "I need to deal with this. We'll talk later." "Alexander," but he was gone. Elena stood in the stable, surrounded by rescued horses, feeling like she'd just glimpsed something important and then had it ripped away. Ash nudged her hand gently. Elena scratched the mare's nose, thinking about damaged things learning to trust again. She didn't see Alexander for the rest of the day. He sent a note apologizing, explaining that business had pulled him to London for urgent meetings. He'd return tomorrow. Elena spent the evening in the neglected library, trying to read, but mostly replaying that moment in the stable over and over. "You're not a transaction to me anymore." The words felt dangerous, like opening a door she wasn't sure she could close again. She was still awake, reading by lamplight, when she heard the commotion. Voices downstairs, loud ones. Then footsteps running through the halls. Elena grabbed her robe and went to investigate. The entrance hall was chaos. Servants rushing around, someone shouting orders, and in the center of it all, Alexander. Soaking wet. Covered in mud. Being supported by two men Elena didn't recognize. "What happened?" she demanded, pushing through the crowd. Alexander looked up. His face was pale, one eye swelling shut. "Carriage accident. On the way back from London. Horse spooked. We went into a ditch. Are you hurt?" "Bruised. Nothing serious." He tried to stand on his own and immediately swayed. Elena caught his arm. "You need a doctor." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You can barely stand." She looked at the nearest servant. "Send for the physician. Now." Mrs. Donnelly appeared, taking control with military efficiency. "Get His Grace to his rooms. Miss Whitford, perhaps you should—" "I'm coming with him," Elena said firmly. No one argued. They got Alexander upstairs and into his private quarters. The east wing Elena had been banned from entering. She barely noticed the rooms, focused entirely on getting him into a chair and making sure he didn't collapse. The doctor arrived within the hour. He examined Alexander thoroughly, pronounced him lucky to have escaped with minor injuries, and prescribed rest. "Someone should stay with him tonight," the doctor said. "Watch for signs of concussion. Wake him every few hours." The servants exchanged glances. Alexander's private quarters were exactly that, private. No one entered without explicit permission. "I'll do it," Elena said. "Miss Whitford, that's highly—" Mrs. Donnelly began. I said I'll do it. Alexander, half asleep in the chair, didn't protest. Everyone left. Elena pulled a second chair close and settled in for a long night. Around midnight, Alexander woke up. Elena? I'm here. He blinked at her groggily. What are you doing in my room? Making sure you don't die of a concussion. I'm not going to die. The doctor said someone needed to watch you. Everyone else was too afraid to invade your sacred privacy. I wasn't. He almost smiled. Of course you weren't. How do you feel? Like I was thrown from a carriage. Accurate. He shifted in the chair, wincing. You should go to bed. I'm fine. I'm staying. Elena, we're not arguing about this. I'm staying. He looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. Thank you. They sat in silence. Elena watched him drift back to sleep, his face finally relaxing. She thought about what he'd said in the stable, about trying, about her not being a transaction. She thought about Catherine's warning. He'll never love you. He's not capable of it. And she thought about her own fear, that even if she tried, even if she opened herself up to the possibility of making this work, she'd just end up broken again. But sitting there in the dark, watching Alexander sleep, something became clear. She was already in this, already invested, already starting to care whether he lived or died, whether he trusted her or pushed her away. The question wasn't whether she could protect herself anymore. The question was whether she was brave enough to stop trying. Alexander woke her at dawn, his hand on her shoulder, gentle but insistent. You fell asleep in the chair, he said quietly. Elena jerked upright, neck screaming in protest. She'd meant to stay awake, to check on him every few hours like the doctor ordered. Instead, she'd dozed off sometime after 3 and slept through until morning. I'm sorry, I should have... You stayed all night. He looked better than he had. The swelling around his eye had gone down, color returning to his face. Thank you. She stood, wincing as her spine cracked. How do you feel? Like I survived something I shouldn't have. He moved to the window, looking out at the grounds. The carriage driver said the horse bolted for no reason, just spooked and ran. We were lucky the ditch wasn't deeper. Something in his tone made Elena pause. You don't believe that? I don't know what I believe. He turned to face her. But I've had horses spook before. This felt different, deliberate. You think someone caused the accident? I think it's possible. The words hung between them, cold and ugly. Who would... Elena started, then stopped. She thought about Catherine at the gala, about Lady Ashford's barely concealed hostility, about the whispers that followed them everywhere. Never mind. Stupid question. Elena, no, I get it. You have enemies, people who'd benefit from seeing you hurt, or dead. She crossed her arms. What I don't get is why you're telling me. Because if someone's targeting me, they'll target you too. You need to be careful. Careful how? He hesitated. Stay close to the estate. Don't go anywhere alone. And if anyone approaches you with questions about me, about us, don't answer them. You're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. He stepped closer. This world, my world, it's not kind to people who show weakness. And right now you're being seen as mine. That makes you vulnerable. Elena wanted to argue, to tell him he was being paranoid, but she'd seen enough in the past 3 weeks to know he wasn't wrong. Fine, she said. I'll be careful. Promise me. I promise. He nodded, but the tension didn't leave his shoulders. I need to go to London again tomorrow, business that can't wait. I'll be gone 2 days, maybe 3. After you just got thrown from a carriage? Especially after that. I need to find out if it was an accident or something worse. He caught her hand, the gesture so unexpected she almost pulled away. Will you be all right here alone? I've been alone most of my life. I'll manage. But his grip tightened. That's not what I asked. Elena looked at their joined hands. His were scarred, small marks she'd never noticed before, evidence of a life that wasn't as pristine as it appeared. I'll be fine. Just come back in one piece. I'll try. He left before lunch, taking 2 guards and a different carriage. Elena watched from the window as they disappeared down the drive, feeling uneasy in a way she couldn't name. The next day started normally enough. Elena had breakfast alone, met with Mrs. Donnelly about a problem with the laundry staff, and spent the afternoon in the library trying to focus on a book about estate management that made her eyes cross. She was reading the same paragraph for the fourth time when one of the younger maids appeared in the doorway. "Miss Whitford, there's a woman here to see you. Says it's urgent." "Who is she?" "Wouldn't give her name, miss, but she looks—" The maid hesitated. "Important." Elena set down the book. "Where is she?" "The front drawing room." The woman waiting for her was around 40, dressed in black with sharp features and sharper eyes. She stood when Elena entered, but didn't offer a smile. "Miss Whitford, thank you for seeing me." "Do I know you?" "No, but I know you." The woman's gaze swept over her, assessing. "My name is Margaret Thorne. I'm a solicitor specializing in matrimonial law." Elena's stomach dropped. "I don't need a solicitor." "Perhaps not, but I thought you should know what you're walking into." She pulled a folder from her bag. "I represent Catherine Graves, the Duke's former wife." "I don't want to hear this. She wants you to know the truth about what happened, about why their marriage really ended." "He already told me. She was unfaithful." Margaret Thorne's expression didn't change. "That's the story he tells. It's not the complete truth." Elena should have thrown her out right then. Should have called for Mrs. Donnelly and had this woman escorted off the property. But something, curiosity or fear, or the need to know what she was really dealing with, kept her rooted in place. "What's the complete truth?" "Catherine made mistakes. I won't deny that. But Alexander, the Duke, he's not the victim he portrays himself as. He's controlling Miss Whitford, obsessively so. He monitored Catherine's every move, questioned her every friendship, isolated her from her family." Thorne set the folder on a side table. "By the time she sought comfort elsewhere, she was desperate, trapped. That's not— he wouldn't— Wouldn't he?" Thorne's voice was quiet, almost kind. "You've been here, what, 3 weeks? Has he let you go anywhere without his permission? Has he introduced you to anyone he doesn't control? Has he told you anything real about himself, or just carefully curated pieces designed to make you sympathetic?" Elena's hands were shaking. "Get out!" "Look in the folder first, then decide." "I said get out." Thorne nodded, unsurprised. "Keep the folder. Read it when you're ready. My card is inside if you want to talk." She left without another word. Elena stared at the folder like it might bite her. She should burn it, throw it away unread, trust Alexander instead of some stranger with an agenda. But her hands were already reaching for it. Inside were legal documents, correspondence, and photographs. Catherine, looking thin and hollow-eyed. Letters she'd written to her family, begging them to help her leave. Medical reports documenting injuries, a broken wrist, bruised ribs, a concussion. And at the bottom, a sworn statement from a physician claiming Catherine had come to him multiple times with injuries she'd attributed to accidents. Elena felt sick. She read every page twice, hands trembling. Some of it had to be lies. Had to be Catherine building a case, constructing a narrative that made her the victim instead of the adulterer. But the photographs didn't lie. Neither did the medical reports. She was still sitting there, surrounded by papers, when Victoria Hartley was announced. "Elena, I hope you don't mind. I was in the area and thought I'd—" Victoria stopped, seeing her face. "What's wrong?" "I don't know." Elena's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I don't know what's real anymore." Victoria sat beside her, taking in the scattered documents. "What is all this?" "Evidence. Maybe. Or a very elaborate lie." Elena looked at her. "How well do you know Alexander?" "Not well. He keeps to himself mostly." "Why?" "Catherine's solicitor was just here. She gave me this." Elena gestured at the folder. "She says he was abusive, controlling. That Catherine's affair was her trying to escape." Victoria picked up one of the medical reports, scanning it. "These are serious allegations." "I know. Do you believe them?" "I don't want to." Elena pressed her hands to her face. "He's been, not perfect, but genuine. I thought we were building something real, But what if I've been reading this all wrong? What if I'm seeing what I want to see instead of what's actually there? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Can I tell you something about my own marriage? Please. When I met Robert, he was charming, attentive. Everyone said I was lucky, and for the first year I believed them. She set down the paper. Then the small controls started. He didn't like my friends, thought I should dress differently, wanted to know where I was every minute. I told myself it was because he loved me, that he was just protective. Elena's chest tightened. What happened? I woke up one day and realized I was terrified of him. Not because he'd hit me, he never did, but because I disappeared. Everything I was, everything I wanted, it all got erased bit by bit until I was just this hollow thing performing the role of his wife. Victoria met her eyes. I'm not saying Alexander is like Robert. I don't know him well enough, but I'm saying, be careful. Men who need control are very good at making you think you're choosing it yourself. After Victoria left, Elena locked herself in her room and tried to think. She went over every interaction with Alexander, looking for signs. The way he'd agreed to her contract amendment, was that respect for her autonomy or just a clever way to make her feel she had power? The horses he rescued, genuine compassion or a calculated display of softness? The moment in the stable when he touched her face, real vulnerability or manipulation? She didn't know, couldn't know. The uncertainty was eating her alive. She was still awake at midnight when a servant knocked. Miss Whitford? There's been an incident. One of the storerooms. Someone broke in. Mrs. Donnelly requests your presence. Elena followed the servant through the dark halls to the basement level. Mrs. Donnelly was waiting outside a heavy wooden door, face grim. What happened? One of the staff heard noises. When we investigated, we found this. She pushed the door open. The storeroom looked like it had been ransacked. Boxes overturned, their contents spilled across the floor. But in the center of the chaos, laid out with deliberate care, were items that made Elena's blood run cold. Her mother's jewelry. The pieces she'd sold months ago to pay for food. A stack of letters in her father's handwriting, addressed to creditors she'd never heard of. And a ledger, open to a page listing debts that dwarfed anything her father had admitted to. Where did these come from? Elena whispered. I don't know, miss. They weren't here yesterday. Elena picked up one of the letters. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely read it, but the words were clear enough. Her father, promising to deliver his daughter as collateral for loans, dated 2 years before his death. 2 years? He'd been planning this for 2 years. Someone planted these here, she said. Someone wants me to find them. But who would? The answer hit her like a physical blow. Catherine. Mrs. Donnelly's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. What makes you say that? She was here today. Her solicitor, showing me evidence that Alexander abused her. Elena looked at the scattered items. Now this, it's too convenient. She's trying to break us apart. Or she's trying to show you the truth. Elena spun around. Margaret Thorne stood in the doorway, calm as death. How did you get in here? I never left. I've been waiting to see if you'd read the folder. When I heard the commotion, I thought you might need context. Thorne gestured at the ledger. Your father didn't just sign one contract with the Duke, he signed 3, each one increasing the debt, increasing his obligations. By the end, he owed Alexander almost everything. The marriage contract was just the final payment. You're lying. Check the signatures, check the dates, it's all there. Elena grabbed the ledger, flipping through pages. The signatures looked right. The dates made a horrible kind of sense. Why are you doing this? She demanded. Because Catherine asked me to. Because she doesn't want to see another woman destroyed by that man. Thorne's voice softened. Because she was where you are now, 3 years ago, thinking she could change him, thinking love would be enough. This isn't love. This is a contract. Is it? Then why do you look like your heart's breaking? Elena wanted to scream. Wanted to throw the ledger at this woman's head and demand she leave. But the evidence was right there in black and white. 3 contracts, 2 years of planning. Her father hadn't made a desperate last-minute deal. He'd systematically sold her to Alexander piece by piece, and Alexander had let him. Miss Whitford, Mrs. Donnelly's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Perhaps we should discuss this with His Grace when he returns. When he returns? Elena laughed, the sound jagged. You mean when he comes back to inspect his purchase? That's not fair. Fair? Nothing about this is fair. Elena threw the ledger down. He knew. He had to know what my father was doing. And he let it happen anyway because what? He needed a wife and I was convenient? You don't know that, Mrs. Donnelly said, but she sounded uncertain. Elena turned to Thorne. What does Catherine want? To help you leave before it's too late. And if I don't want her help? Then you'll end up just like her. Thorne pulled out another document. This is a legal petition. If you sign it, we can have the contract dissolved within a week. Your mother's debts will be transferred to a trust Catherine has established. She'll be protected. You'll be free. Why would Catherine do that? Because she knows what it's like to be trapped. And because, Thorne hesitated, because she still loves him in some twisted way. She doesn't want to see him destroy someone else. Elena's head was pounding. Everything she thought she knew was fracturing, reforming into patterns that made her sick. I need to think. You have until the Duke returns. After that, it gets much harder to leave. Thorne set the petition on a crate. I'll be staying at the Rose and Crown in the village. You have 2 days to decide. She left, taking her folder but leaving the petition behind. Mrs. Donnelly started cleaning up the scattered items, her movements mechanical. What will you do, miss? I don't know. But that was a lie. Elena knew exactly what she had to do. She had to confront Alexander, had to look him in the eye and ask if any of it had been real, or if she'd just been the world's most willing victim. The problem was, she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. She spent the next day and a half in a kind of fugue state, going through motions, attending to duties, all while her mind replayed every conversation, every moment, looking for the truth hidden underneath. Victoria came by again, concerned. Elena told her she was fine, then locked herself in her room before the lie could be exposed. The petition sat on her desk, unsigned. Alexander returned on the third day, just before dinner. Elena heard the carriage arrive and felt her stomach twist. She'd practiced what she'd say, how she'd stay calm and rational and demand answers. But when she walked into the entrance hall and saw him, tired, bruised, but smiling when he caught sight of her, all her carefully planned words evaporated. You're back, she said. I told you I would be. He crossed to her, and she saw the exact moment he registered something was wrong. What happened? We need to talk. His expression closed off instantly. All right. They went to his study. Elena closed the door and turned to face him, holding the ledger like a weapon. When were you going to tell me about the other contracts? He went very still. What? My father signed 3 contracts with you. Not 1. 3. Over 2 years. She opened the ledger, showing him the pages. You've been planning this, planning me for 2 years, and you never thought to mention it? Where did you get that? Does it matter? Yes, it matters. That's private financial information. Someone stole it and planted it for you to find. He reached for the ledger, but she pulled it back. Elena, listen to me. I'm done listening. I'm done being the naive girl who believes whatever story you feed me. Her voice cracked. Was any of it real? The horses, the conversations, the moment in the stable, was any of it actually real, or was I just another transaction you were managing? That's not fair. Neither is buying someone's daughter in installments. I didn't buy you. The shout echoed off the walls. Alexander took a breath, visibly trying to control himself. Your father came to me 3 years ago. He was drowning in debt, desperate for help. I gave him loans, standard business loans with standard terms. When he couldn't repay them, he offered alternative collateral. I refused. Then why? Because he kept asking, kept pushing, and eventually, Alexander's jaw tightened. Eventually, I agreed to consider it, but only if specific conditions were met, only if you were willing, only if there was a way out built into the contract. The amendment I demanded, which I agreed to immediately because it was already there. I just worded it differently. He stepped closer. I'm not the villain here, Elena. I gave your father multiple chances to find another solution. I built in protections for you. I've tried from the beginning to make this something you could choose, not something forced on you." Elena wanted to believe him. Every part of her wanted to believe him. But Catherine's photographs were burned into her mind, the bruises, the fear. "What happened with Catherine?" she asked quietly. The question landed like a bomb. Alexander turned away, his shoulders rigid. "I've told you what happened. You told me she was unfaithful. You didn't tell me she was afraid of you." "What?" Her solicitor showed me medical reports, injuries, letters where Catherine begged her family to help her escape. Elena's hands were shaking. "She says you were controlling, abusive, that the affair was her trying to survive." "That's a lie." "Is it? Or is this—" She gestured between them. "A pattern. You find someone vulnerable, someone who needs what you can provide, and you trap them in gold chains until they can't remember who they were before you?" Alexander's face went white. "You think I hurt Catherine?" "I don't know what to think anymore." "Then let me be very clear." His voice was cold, every word precisely cut. "Catherine was unfaithful. She lied, she cheated, and when I caught her, she tried to destroy me out of spite. Those medical reports? From accidents? Real accidents that she then spun into a narrative where I was the monster. The letters to her family? Written after I filed for annulment, when she realized she'd lose everything. How do I know you're telling the truth? Because I'm standing here answering your questions instead of throwing you out for believing I'm capable of abuse." He slammed his hand against the desk. "I have been nothing but honest with you. I've shown you parts of myself I show no one. I've tried—" He stopped, breathing hard. "You've tried what?" Elena asked. "To be someone worth trusting, to prove that not everything is a transaction, that not everyone will hurt you." His voice dropped. "But you've already decided, haven't you? Catherine's poison worked. You're looking at me right now and seeing a monster. I'm seeing someone I don't know, someone who might have been lying to me from the beginning." The silence that followed was devastating. "Fine," Alexander said finally. "If that's what you believe, then maybe Catherine's right. Maybe I'm incapable of this, of trust, of vulnerability, of whatever the hell you need me to be." He walked to the door. "The petition Catherine's solicitor gave you, sign it. I'll honor it. You'll be free. Alexander, sign it. I'm done trying to convince you I'm not the villain in your story." He left, the door slamming behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Elena stood alone in the study, surrounded by evidence and accusations and the wreckage of something that might have been real. She didn't know what the truth was anymore. Didn't know if Alexander was a man who'd been destroyed by betrayal and was trying to build something genuine, or a predator who'd gotten very good at playing the wounded victim. All she knew was that she'd just destroyed whatever fragile trust they'd built, and she had no idea how to fix it. The next morning she woke to chaos. Servants running through the halls, Mrs. Donnelly shouting orders, and at the center of it all, 2 men in uniform standing in the entrance hall. Constables. Elena came down the stairs in her nightgown, not caring how it looked. "What's going on?" One of the constables turned. "Miss Elena Whitford?" "Yes." "You're under arrest for theft." The world tilted. "What?" "We have a warrant. You're accused of stealing valuable items from this household and attempting to sell them." He pulled out a document. "Evidence has been provided by Miss Margaret Thorne," the other constable finished, "acting on behalf of the estate's interests." Elena felt like she'd been punched. "That's insane. I haven't stolen anything." "The evidence suggests otherwise. You'll need to come with us." "No, absolutely not. Where's Alexander? Where's the Duke?" "His Grace left for London early this morning, before the warrant was issued." Of course he did. Of course he'd left before this happened. Mrs. Donnelly appeared, wringing her hands. "Miss Whitford, perhaps you should contact a solicitor." "I didn't do this." Elena's voice cracked. "This is Catherine. She's setting me up. Can't you see that?" But the constables were already moving forward. One of them pulled out shackles. "Please don't make this difficult, miss." Elena looked around wildly, at the servants watching with pity or suspicion. At Mrs. Donnelly, helpless. At the home she'd just started to think of as something other than a prison. She thought about the petition, still unsigned on her desk. She thought about Alexander's face when she'd accused him of being a monster. She thought about how thoroughly, completely she'd been played. Then the cold metal closed around her wrists, and she had no more time to think at all. The holding cell was smaller than her bedroom at the estate, with stone walls that wept moisture and a single barred window too high to see anything but gray sky. Elena sat on the narrow bench, still in her nightgown with a rough blanket thrown over her shoulders, and tried to understand how everything had fallen apart so completely. The constables had been efficient, professional. They'd loaded her into a wagon like she was cargo, driven her to the magistrate's office in the village, and locked her in this cell without ceremony. No one had listened when she'd tried to explain. No one had cared. She'd been here 6 hours now, maybe 7. Time moves strangely when you were staring at walls and trying not to panic. The evidence against her was damning. Someone, Catherine, had to be Catherine, had planted items in Elena's room, expensive items from the estate. Silver candlesticks, a jade figurine, a set of pearl earrings that had belonged to Alexander's grandmother, all hidden in her wardrobe where the constables had found them within minutes of searching. And the timing was perfect. Alexander gone to London, Elena alone and vulnerable, no witnesses to corroborate her story. It was a trap executed with surgical precision. The door at the end of the corridor opened. Footsteps approached, echoing off stone. Elena looked up, expecting a guard or maybe a magistrate ready to formally charge her. Instead, Victoria Hartley appeared outside her cell, fury written across every line of her face. "Tell me you didn't actually steal those items." "I didn't." Elena stood, gripping the bars. "Victoria, I swear I didn't." "I know you didn't. I'm not an idiot." Victoria pulled a chair over and sat down, close enough to talk quietly. "But half of London thinks you did. Catherine's been very busy spreading the story. Poor, desperate girl from a ruined family, marrying a duke for money, couldn't resist stealing a bit extra on the side." Elena's stomach twisted. "How bad is it?" "Bad. The gossip is everywhere. Lady Ashford is practically gleeful. Even people who were willing to give you a chance are backing away." Victoria's expression softened. "But there are also people who don't believe it. People who know Catherine's capable of this kind of manipulation." "Like who?" "Like me. Like Mrs. Donnelly, who's been running around the estate looking for proof you were framed. Like Henry Carstairs, who refuses to believe Alexander would be foolish enough to engage himself to a thief." She paused. "And like Alexander himself, apparently." Elena's heart stopped. "What?" "He's on his way back from London. I sent word as soon as I heard about the arrest. He's furious. At me. At the situation. At Catherine. At himself for leaving you alone." Victoria leaned forward. "Elena, he didn't know this was going to happen. Whatever you two fought about, he didn't set you up." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen men who destroy women. My husband was one of them. Alexander isn't that." She pulled a paper from her bag. "This is a statement from one of the stable hands. He saw a woman matching Catherine's description near the main house the night before you were arrested, after hours when she had no reason to be there." Elena took the paper with shaking hands. "Will this help?" "It's a start, but we need more." Victoria stood. "I'm going to talk to the magistrate. See if I can delay the formal charges until Alexander gets here. In the meantime, try not to confess to anything or sign anything. And for the love of—" She stopped herself. "Just hold on." She left before Elena could thank her. The next hour crawled by. Elena paced the small cell until her feet hurt, then sat and tried to think through what had happened. Catherine had known exactly which pressure points to hit. The documents about her father's contracts, real enough to be convincing, damaging enough to make Elena doubt everything. The medical reports and photographs, whether true or fabricated, effective at making her question Alexander's character. And then, when Elena was most vulnerable, most uncertain, the frame job to destroy her completely. It was brilliant in a vicious way. And Elena had walked right into it. The sound of raised voices filtered down the corridor, someone arguing with the guards. The voice was familiar, sharp with authority and barely controlled rage. Alexander. Elena was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to move, gripping the bars as footsteps thundered toward her cell. He appeared like a storm, coat still on, hair disheveled, eyes wild. When he saw her behind bars, something in his expression cracked. "Open this door," he said to the guard trailing behind him. Your Grace, I can't just... I said open it. Now. The guard fumbled with keys. The lock turned. Alexander was through the door before it fully opened, crossing the cell in 2 strides and pulling Elena into his arms so hard it knocked the breath out of her. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "I'm so sorry. I should never have left. I should have known she'd try something like this." Elena stood rigid in his embrace, not sure what to do with her hands, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You believe me?" He pulled back enough to look at her face. "Of course I believe you. Did you think I wouldn't? I accused you of being like her, of abusing Catherine, of manipulating me. Why would you? Because you were scared and confused and someone deliberately fed you lies designed to make you doubt me." His hands came up to frame her face. "I was angry, hurt, but I never believed you were capable of theft, Elena. Not for a second." She felt something inside her chest crack open. "The evidence is fabricated. Catherine planted those items. I'd stake my life on it." He looked past her to the guard. "Where's the magistrate?" "In his office, Your Grace, but..." "Get him, now, and bring all the evidence against Miss Whitford." The guard practically ran. Alexander turned back to Elena, his hands still cupping her face. "Listen to me very carefully. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Catherine's made her move. She wants to destroy you, destroy us, and she doesn't care how much collateral damage she causes. But I'm not going to let that happen." "How can you stop it?" "By proving she's lying, by tearing apart her story piece by piece until everyone sees what she really is." His jaw set. "And by trusting you even when you don't trust yourself." The words hit her like a physical blow. "I do trust you." "Do you? Because last time we talked, you looked at me like I was capable of hurting you." "I was scared." "I know, and that's the genius of what Catherine did. She took every fear you have about being trapped, being controlled, being used, and she turned them into weapons against me." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "But I need to know, Elena, right now. Do you believe I would hurt you?" She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception. All she saw was exhaustion, anger, and something that looked like desperation. "No," she said quietly. "I don't believe you would hurt me." "Then trust that I'm going to get you out of this." The magistrate arrived 10 minutes later, a portly man with nervous eyes who clearly didn't want to be caught between a duke and a scandal. He spread the evidence across a small table, the items supposedly stolen, witness statements, the warrant itself. Alexander examined each piece with clinical precision. "This candlestick," he said, picking it up. "It's from the formal dining room. That room has been locked since my mother died 5 years ago. I keep the only key." He pulled a key from his pocket, setting it on the table. "Miss Whitford has never had access to that room." The magistrate frowned. "Then how?" "Because someone else has a key. Someone who used to live in that house and likely made copies before she left." Alexander moved to the jade figurine. "This piece was in my study. Again, a room Miss Whitford has only entered when I invited her. The pearl earrings," he picked them up, "were kept in a locked safe in the East Wing, a wing Miss Whitford was explicitly forbidden from entering." "Your Grace, I understand you want to defend your fiancée, but the evidence proves nothing except that someone with intimate knowledge of my household planted these items to frame her." Alexander's voice went cold. "And I can tell you exactly who that someone is." "Catherine Graves," Elena said. The magistrate looked between them. "Your former wife, Your Grace, that's a serious accusation. Less serious than falsely accusing an innocent woman of theft." Alexander pulled out papers of his own. "I had my solicitor pull Catherine's financial records. She's been paying Margaret Thorne, the woman who approached Miss Whitford, for the past 3 months. She's also made several large withdrawals that correspond exactly with dates when Miss Whitford received evidence about our relationship. That's circumstantial. It's a pattern. And I have a witness who saw Catherine on the estate grounds the night before the arrest, despite having no legitimate reason to be there." He leaned forward. "You can either help me prove this, or you can be the magistrate who arrested an innocent woman at the behest of a vengeful ex-wife. Choose carefully." The magistrate wavered. Elena could see him weighing options, protect himself or risk angering a duke. "I'll need to investigate further," he said finally. "In the meantime, Miss Whitford can be released on your recognizance, Your Grace." "She'll be released with all charges dropped pending your investigation." "Your Grace, all charges dropped. Or I'll have my solicitor file a complaint about your handling of this case with the Lord Chancellor. I believe he's a personal friend of mine." The magistrate went pale. "All charges dropped. Pending investigation." "Good." Alexander stood. "We'll be at Ashton Hall if you need anything further," which you won't. He took Elena's arm and guided her out of the cell, through the corridor, past the gawking guards, and into a carriage waiting outside. The moment the door closed, Elena started shaking. "It's over," Alexander said quietly. "You're safe. For now. Until Catherine tries something else. She won't get another chance." Elena looked at him. "You can't know that." "Yes, I can, because I'm done playing defense." He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Catherine wants a war. She's got one." They rode in silence for several minutes. Elena felt hollowed out, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "Why did you come back?" "Because you needed me." "That's not an answer." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "When Victoria's message reached me in London, my first thought was that this was impossible, that there had to be a mistake. My second thought was that if it wasn't a mistake, if you really had stolen from me, then I'd misjudged you completely, and everything I'd started to feel was a lie. What changed your mind?" "Nothing. I never actually believed it." He looked at her. "I know you, Elena. You're stubborn, defiant, willing to challenge me at every turn. But you're not a thief, you're not dishonest, and you sure as hell aren't stupid enough to steal items and leave them in your own wardrobe." Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. "That's your defense of my character? That I'm too smart to be that obvious?" "Among other things." "What other things?" He hesitated, then reached for her hand. "That you stayed with me all night when I was hurt. That you stood up to Catherine at the gala when you could have let me run. That you demanded I prove I was worth marrying instead of just accepting the contract." His grip tightened. "You're not someone who takes the easy path, Elena. And theft would have been the easy path." She looked down at their joined hands. His were scarred, calloused despite his wealth. Hands that worked, that rescued broken horses, that had touched her face with surprising gentleness. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "About what I said in the study. I don't think you're a monster. I was scared and I lashed out, and I'm sorry. I know." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He turned to face her more fully. "Catherine did exactly what she intended. She made you doubt me, doubt us, doubt everything. That's not your fault. That's hers." "But I should have trusted you. We've known each other less than a month. Trust takes time. I understand that." His voice dropped. "What I need to know is whether you want that time, whether you want to keep trying." Elena thought about the petition, still unsigned on her desk. She thought about walking away, protecting herself, going back to a life where she controlled her own fate. She thought about Alexander in the stable, showing her his secret kindness. Alexander defending her to a magistrate without hesitation. Alexander racing back from London because she needed him. "I want to keep trying," she said, "but I need you to be honest with me. About Catherine. About what really happened." He took a breath. "All right. The complete truth." They were nearly back to the estate when he finished talking. Elena listened without interrupting, letting him tell the story his way. Catherine had been perfect on paper, beautiful, connected, everything a duchess should be. The marriage had been his parents' idea, arranged when he was too young to question it. They'd married with little affection but mutual respect, or so he'd thought. The first year was fine, distant but fine. They maintained separate lives, came together for social obligations, played their roles. The second year, things soured. Catherine grew resentful of his work, his long hours, his inability to be the romantic figure she'd imagined. She wanted attention he didn't know how to give, wanted emotional vulnerability he'd been trained since childhood to hide. She started spending time with his business partner. Alexander noticed, didn't think much of it. Then the partner started making suggestions about business deals that would benefit Catherine's family, small conflicts of interest that set off warning bells. Alexander investigated, found evidence of the affair, confronted Catherine. She'd laughed in his face, told him she'd been sleeping with the partner for months, that Alexander was cold, unfeeling, impossible to love, that she'd tried to reach him and given up. I had the marriage annulled quietly, Alexander said. Paid her a settlement, let her keep her reputation mostly intact. I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. She couldn't let it go, couldn't accept that I'd ended things on my terms instead of begging her to stay. So she started spreading stories about how I'd abused her, controlled her, destroyed her. He looked out the window. Some of it was based on truth. I am controlling about certain things. I do like knowing where people are, what they're doing. But it's not about power. It's about protection, Elena finished. You learned you couldn't trust anyone, so you built systems to protect yourself. Yes. And Catherine turned those systems into evidence of abuse. The medical reports were real, but the injuries were from accidents, falling from a horse, tripping on stairs. I was there for most of them, held her hand while physicians treated her. His jaw tightened. She took genuine care and twisted it into something sinister. Elena processed this. Why didn't you fight back, publicly, I mean? Because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a public battle with someone I once cared about. Because destroying her wouldn't undo what she'd done. And because, he paused, because part of me wondered if she was right. If I was incapable of the kind of love people deserve. You're not incapable of love. How do you know? Because you came back for me. Because you trusted me when you had every reason not to. Because you're sitting here telling me the complete truth, even though it makes you vulnerable. She squeezed his hand. That's not inability to love. That's courage. Something in his expression shifted, softened. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. The carriage pulled up to the estate. Servants rushed out to meet them, Mrs. Donnelly at the front looking both relieved and terrified. Your Grace, Miss Whitford, thank heavens you're both safe, but you should know there are reporters at the front gate. News of the arrest has spread. Alexander's expression went hard again. How many? At least a dozen. They're demanding statements. They can demand all they want. Elena, go inside, get cleaned up, rest. I'll handle this. No. He turned to her, surprised. Elena, I said no. This is my scandal too. My reputation on the line. She straightened her shoulders. I'm not hiding while you fight my battles. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, because if I hide, I look guilty. If I run, Catherine wins. She looked at the gathered servants, many of whom had probably wondered if she was really a thief. I'm innocent. Let's make sure everyone knows it. Alexander studied her for a moment, then nodded. Together, then. They walked to the front gate side by side. The reporters surged forward, shouting questions over each other. Miss Whitford, is it true you were arrested for theft? Your Grace, are you still engaged to a criminal? Will there be charges filed? Alexander raised a hand and the crowd quieted slightly. Miss Whitford was wrongly accused and has been fully cleared of all charges. The evidence against her was fabricated by someone with malicious intent. We will be pursuing legal action against the responsible parties. Who fabricated the evidence? That will come out in due time. Miss Whitford, what do you have to say about the accusations? Elena stepped forward before Alexander could answer for her. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I was targeted because someone wanted to destroy my relationship with the Duke. They failed. I'm here, I'm innocent, and I'm not going anywhere. Are you still planning to marry? She looked at Alexander. He looked back at her, a question in his eyes. This was it. The moment where she could back out, use the scandal as an excuse to end things before they went further. Or she could choose something different. Yes, she said clearly, we are. The reporters erupted. Alexander's hand found hers, gripping tight. They answered a few more questions, then retreated to the house. The moment the door closed behind them, Elena felt her knees go weak. That was insane, she breathed. That was perfect. Alexander pulled her into his arms. You were perfect. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was trying not to throw up. He laughed. The sound startled out of him. Well, you succeeded admirably. They stood in the entrance hall holding each other while the world continued to spin outside. Mrs. Donnelly tactfully directed servants away, giving them space. What happens now? Elena asked. Now we prove Catherine was behind this. Publicly. Completely. So thoroughly that she'll never be able to show her face in society again. How? I have investigators gathering evidence. Carstairs is compiling financial records. Victoria's getting witness statements. His arms tightened around her. But I need something from you first. What? He pulled back, looking at her seriously. I need you to be sure about this. About us. Because once we commit to fighting Catherine publicly, once we stand together against this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to me, to my reputation, to my world, in ways that go beyond any contract. Elena thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the doubt, the moments where she'd been certain this was all a terrible mistake. But she also thought about Alexander showing her the horses, about him racing back from London because she needed him, about him standing before a magistrate and demanding her freedom without hesitation. She thought about trust, real trust, not the paper kind written into contracts. I'm sure, she said. Elena? I'm sure, she repeated. I choose this. I choose you. Not because of the contract, not because I have to, because I want to. He kissed her then, fierce and desperate and full of things neither of them had words for yet. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. Catherine's not going to give up easily, he warned. Good. Neither are we. The next week was a whirlwind. Alexander's investigators uncovered a paper trail showing Catherine had paid Margaret Thorne to approach Elena. More than that, she'd paid the stable hand who'd tampered with Alexander's carriage, causing the accident that had sent him to London at the perfect moment to leave Elena vulnerable. Witness statements emerged. Servants who'd seen Catherine sneaking around the estate. A jeweler who confirmed she'd tried to sell items matching the stolen pieces weeks before Elena was accused. A former maid willing to testify that Catherine had ordered her to make copies of estate keys before the annulment. The evidence was damning, overwhelming. Carstairs assembled it all into a legal filing that read like an indictment. They submitted it to the courts, along with a formal accusation of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted defamation. Catherine fought back, hired her own lawyers, issued denials, tried to spin the narrative, but the evidence was too solid, too many witnesses, too much documentation. 3 weeks after Elena's arrest, Catherine was arrested herself. The scandal was enormous. Headlines screamed about the vengeful ex-wife, the wrongly accused fiancé, the duke who'd stood by the woman he loved against all odds. Society, which had been ready to destroy Elena, turned on Catherine with vicious enthusiasm. Lady Ashford, who'd been so quick to judge, issued a public apology. Other families who'd snubbed Elena at social events suddenly sent invitations. Elena ignored most of them. She had more important things to focus on, like planning a wedding. They set the date for 6 weeks from the day Elena had been cleared, exactly the length of the trial engagement period they'd originally agreed to. It felt right, symmetrical. The morning of the ceremony, Elena stood in front of a mirror while Victoria helped her into a dress that had been made specifically for her. Not borrowed, not from someone else's wardrobe. Hers. You look beautiful, Victoria said, fastening the last button. I look terrified. Also beautiful. Elena turned, studying her reflection. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who'd arrived at Ashton Hall 2 months ago. Stronger, surer. Can I tell you something? Victoria said quietly. I was wrong about Alexander. What do you mean? When I warned you about controlling men, about how they erase you piece by piece. She met Elena's eyes in the mirror. He's not like that. He's not like Robert. He sees you, Elena, and he chooses you anyway. I choose him too. I know. That's why this is going to work. There was a knock at the door. Mrs. Donnelly appeared, looking emotional. It's time, Miss Whitford. Elena took a deep breath. Right. Time to go get married. The ceremony was smaller than traditional Duke weddings, only 100 guests instead of 600. The people there were ones who mattered, who'd stood by them during the scandal, who believed in what they were building. Elena walked down the aisle alone. Her mother was there, crying happy tears for once. But Elena didn't need anyone to give her away. She was giving herself, by choice. Alexander waited at the altar, looking like he'd barely slept but smiling anyway. When she reached him, he took her hands. "You showed up," he said quietly. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought you might realize you could do better." "Probably. But I'm stubborn that way." The ceremony was traditional, the vows standard, but when the officiant asked if they took each other, when they said, "I do," it meant something different than it would have 2 months ago. It meant they'd chosen this, chosen each other, despite everything that had tried to tear them apart. When Alexander kissed her, the crowd erupted in applause. Elena barely heard it. She was too busy kissing him back, pouring 2 months of fear and doubt and hard-won trust into a single moment. They broke apart, both smiling, and turned to face their guests as husband and wife. The reception was held at the estate. Dancing, food, speeches that made Elena laugh and cry in equal measure. Victoria gave a toast about courage. Carstairs gave one about legal precedent that somehow ended up being touching. Late in the evening, Elena and Alexander slipped away from the crowd. They ended up in the stable, visiting the horses that had started everything. Ash limped over to greet them, nuzzling Alexander's hand. "She likes you," Elena said. "She has good taste." Elena leaned against the stall door, watching him with the horse. "We survived, didn't we? All of Catherine's schemes, all the doubt, all of it. We did more than survive. We won. Did we, though? Or did we just choose each other despite everything trying to stop us?" Alexander looked at her. "That is winning, Elena." She considered this. "I suppose it is." He pulled her close, holding her in the quiet of the stable while outside the party continued. "I love you," he said. "I don't think I've actually said that yet, but I do. I love you." Elena's breath caught. "Even though I accused you of being a monster? Even though I nearly signed Catherine's petition to leave? Even though I'm stubborn and defiant and challenge you constantly? Especially because of that." She kissed him, soft and slow. When she pulled back, she smiled. "Good, because I love you too. Your control issues and your trust problems and your terrible habit of rescuing broken things. You're not broken. Neither are you, not anymore." They stayed there until the stars came out, 2 damaged people who'd found something whole in each other. And when they finally returned to the party, walking hand in hand through gardens that had once felt like a prison, Elena realized something. She hadn't just survived the trap that had been set for her, she'd turned it into freedom. The party wound down near midnight, guests departing with congratulations and promises to call soon. Elena stood at the entrance with Alexander, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, watching carriages roll away into darkness. "They're all going to talk about us," she said. "They already were. At least now they'll have something true to say." She smiled, exhausted but content. "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we start actually living, instead of just surviving." But tomorrow came with unexpected news. Elena woke to find Alexander already dressed, sitting at the small desk in their bedroom reading a letter. His expression was unreadable. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up. He looked at her, something complicated in his eyes. "Catherine's trial date has been set, 3 weeks from now." "That's good, isn't it? Means this will be over soon." Her solicitor sent this along with the court notice. He handed her the letter. "She wants to speak with you, privately, before the trial." Elena read the request twice, certain she'd misunderstood. "Why would I agree to that?" "You wouldn't. I'm not even considering allowing it." "Allowing it?" She raised an eyebrow. "I can make my own decisions about who I speak to." "Elena, she tried to destroy you, put you in jail, nearly succeeded in tearing us apart before we'd even started." His voice was tight. "Meeting with her is exactly what she wants. Another chance to manipulate. Maybe. Or maybe she has something to say that needs to be said." Elena set the letter down. "I'm not afraid of her anymore, Alexander." "You should be. She's desperate. Desperate people are dangerous. So are people who've survived their schemes." She touched his hand. I'm not saying I'll definitely meet with her, but I'm not saying no just because you think it's risky. Let me think about it. He wanted to argue. She could see it in the set of his jaw, but he nodded slowly. All right, but if you decide to do this, I'm coming with you. We'll see. She spent the next 2 days considering. Victoria thought it was madness. Mrs. Donnelly looked horrified at the suggestion. Carstairs drafted 17 reasons why it was legally inadvisable, but something about it nagged at Elena, some sense that there was unfinished business, a conversation that needed to happen for her to fully close this chapter. On the third day, she sent a reply. She would meet Catherine, alone, in a neutral location, a tea shop in the village, public enough to be safe but private enough to talk honestly. Alexander didn't like it. He made that very clear over breakfast the morning of the meeting. This is a mistake, noted. She's going to try to get in your head again. She can try. Elena, Alexander, I need to do this. She set down her cup. Not for her, for me. I need to look her in the eye and not flinch. I need to prove to myself that I'm not the frightened girl she tried to make me. He studied her for a long moment. You were never that girl, not even at your most scared. Maybe not, but I need to believe it. She stood, kissing his forehead. I'll be fine. I promise. I'm sending a guard anyway. He'll wait outside. Fine. She arrived at the tea shop at 2. Catherine was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking smaller than Elena remembered. Thinner. The confidence that had radiated from her at the gala was gone, replaced by something brittle. Elena sat down without greeting. Thank you for coming, Catherine said quietly. I'm here. Talk. Catherine flinched at the bluntness. I wanted to apologize. For which part? Framing me for theft? Trying to destroy my relationship? Nearly getting me thrown in prison? All of it. Catherine's hands twisted in her lap. It's not an excuse, but I was destroyed when Alexander ended things. I know what I did was wrong, sleeping with his partner, lying to him, but he cut me off so completely. Like I never mattered, like 2 years of marriage meant nothing. He paid you a settlement, protected your reputation as much as he could. You could have walked away. I know. I should have. Catherine looked up, and her eyes were raw. But I couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand seeing him move on like I was nothing. When I heard about you, about this new engagement, I lost my mind a little. Wanted to hurt him the way he'd hurt me. So you hurt me instead. Yes, Catherine's voice broke. And I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of what I did to you. You were there. An easy target. Elena felt anger rise, hot and sharp. You almost destroyed my life because you couldn't handle your own feelings? Because you needed revenge on a man who had every right to end a marriage where you'd been unfaithful? I know it was wrong. Wrong doesn't begin to cover it. Elena leaned forward. Do you have any idea what it was like? Sitting in that cell, knowing I was innocent but having no way to prove it? Watching people I barely knew decide I was a criminal? Alexander is the only reason I'm not still there, fighting charges that could have ruined everything. He loves you, Catherine said softly. He never loved me like that. You're right. He didn't, because love isn't control. It's not possession. It's trust. Elena stood. If this was your apology, consider it heard but not accepted. If you wanted my forgiveness, you're not getting it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Wait. Catherine reached out but didn't touch her. There's something else. Elena paused. The medical reports I gave Margaret Thorne, the ones showing injuries. Catherine took a shaky breath. They were real. But they weren't from Alexander. They were from the man I had the affair with. He hurt me. Multiple times. And I was too ashamed to tell anyone the truth, so I let people believe it was Alexander. The words landed like stones. You let the world think he abused you to cover for someone else? I was afraid and angry. And by the time I realized how far the lies had gone, it was too late to take them back without admitting everything. Catherine's hands were shaking. I'm telling you now because it needs to be on record, before the trial. Alexander deserves to have his name cleared completely. Elena sat back down slowly. Why tell me? Why not tell him directly? Because he won't see me, won't take my letters or my calls. But you'll make sure he knows. That people know. Catherine pulled out a sealed envelope. This is a sworn statement. Everything I just told you, signed and witnessed. Give it to his solicitor. Use it however you need to. Elena took the envelope, feeling its weight. This doesn't fix what you did to me. I know. And it doesn't make us friends. I know that too. But it's a start. Elena stood again. For what it's worth, I hope you get help. Real help. Because whatever drove you to this, it's going to destroy you if you don't deal with it. Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. Tell Alexander I'm sorry. For all of it. Elena left without promising anything. She went straight to Carstairs' office and delivered the statement. He read it, eyes widening, then immediately began making copies and filing motions. This changes everything, he said. With this testimony, we can clear His Grace's name completely. The rumors, the whispers. This will end them. Make sure it's public, Elena said. I want everyone who believed Catherine's lies to see the truth. It will be done. She returned to the estate feeling lighter. Not because she'd forgiven Catherine, she hadn't, not really, but because she'd faced the woman who'd tried to destroy her and walked away stronger. Alexander was waiting in the entrance hall, pacing. He stopped when he saw her. Are you all right? I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. She handed him the letter Catherine had written. Read this. He did, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that might have been relief. She confessed, he said quietly, to everything. The lies about you, the truth about her affair partner, all of it. Elena touched his arm. Your name is cleared, Alexander, completely. He pulled her into his arms, holding tight. Thank you. I didn't do anything. She chose to tell the truth. You gave her the chance to. You went there, faced her, when you had every reason not to. He pulled back to look at her. You're braver than anyone I've ever met. Or more stubborn. That too. The trial when it came was anticlimactic. Catherine pleaded guilty to fraud and conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 2 years, suspended on condition she left the country and had no contact with Alexander or Elena. She accepted without argument. The courtroom cleared, spectators rushing to spread the news. Elena and Alexander stayed seated as the crowd thinned. It's really over, Elena said. It is. What do we do now? He smiled. Whatever we want. What they wanted, it turned out, was to build something new. Over the following months, they transformed Ashton Hall from a fortress into something that felt like home. Elena opened the East Wing, banishing the separation that had marked Alexander's previous marriage. They converted the unused music room into a space for meetings with tenants, making the estate administration more accessible. The rescued horse stable expanded. Elena started working with local families to identify animals that needed help, creating a small network of people dedicated to saving what others had given up on. She also started teaching. Some of the estate workers had children who couldn't afford formal education. Elena began holding lessons twice a week in the library, reading, writing, mathematics. Alexander funded it without being asked, hiring additional teachers as the program grew. Society, which had been ready to destroy her, now whispered about the Duchess of Ashton's charitable works, about how she'd changed the Duke, made him more accessible, less isolated. Elena didn't care what they whispered. She was too busy actually living. 6 months after the wedding, Victoria came to visit. They sat in the garden drinking tea while Alexander was in London on business. You look happy, Victoria said. I am. Is that allowed? After everything you went through? Absolutely, Victoria smiled. You know what I realized? You didn't just survive Catherine's schemes, you fundamentally changed how this world works. Elena laughed. That's a bit dramatic. Is it? Think about it. You stood up to one of the most powerful women in society and won. You proved that being authentic matters more than maintaining appearances. You've started programs that help people no one else bothered helping. Victoria leaned forward. You've shown that power doesn't have to mean control. It can mean building something better. Elena considered this. I just did what needed doing. That's what makes it matter. That evening, Elena walked through the estate grounds as the sun set. She passed the stables where Ash and a dozen other rescued horses grazed peacefully, past the library where tomorrow's lessons were already prepared, past gardens that were slowly being redesigned to be functional as well as beautiful, vegetables growing alongside roses, herbs mixing with ornamental flowers. She thought about the girl who'd arrived here 6 months ago, desperate, trapped, seeing only walls and obligations. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that survival wasn't enough. You had to choose what you were surviving for. Alexander returned late that night. Elena was in their bedroom, reading by lamplight. "How was London?" she asked. "Productive. I sold the partnership interest I still held in the business Catherine's lover ran, donated the profits to your education program." He sat beside her. "Also, I bought something." "What kind of something?" He pulled out a document. "A building in the city. Nothing fancy, but structurally sound. I thought we could convert it into a proper school, not just for estate children, for anyone who needs it." Elena stared at the deed. "Alexander, that's enormous." "So is what you've already started. This just gives it room to grow." He took her hand. "I watched you today, teaching those children, watched their faces light up when they learned something new. And I realized this is what power should do. Create opportunities, open doors." "You're getting philosophical in your old age." "I'm 36. Ancient." He kissed her, soft and slow. "I love you. Have I mentioned that recently?" "Not in the last 3 hours." "Unacceptable. I'll have to remedy that immediately." They stayed up late, making plans for the school, discussing which teachers to hire, what curriculum to offer, how to make it accessible to families who couldn't afford tuition. Somewhere around midnight, Elena realized she was happy. Not just content or surviving or making the best of things, actually genuinely happy. A year after their wedding, they hosted a celebration at the estate. Not for themselves, for the opening of the school they'd built together. 200 people attended, families from the estate and the surrounding villages, local officials, teachers, students who'd already enrolled. Alexander gave a short speech about education and opportunity. Elena spoke about second chances and believing in people others had written off. But the moment that mattered most came after the formal ceremony ended. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, approached Elena shyly. "Your Grace, I wanted to say thank you for the school." "You're very welcome. What's your name?" "Sarah. My da works in your stables, taking care of the rescue horses." Elena smiled. "Ash's favorite person." Sarah beamed. "You remember?" "Of course. She only lets certain people near her. You must be special." "That's what Da says. Says we're alike, me and Ash. Both had rough starts, but found somewhere safe." Sarah held out a folded paper. "I wrote this for you, for the school opening." Elena unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was careful, painstaking. The essay was titled, "What Second Chances Mean." She read about a girl who'd thought she'd never learn to read, who'd believed education was for other people, richer people, people who mattered, who'd been given a chance she never expected and was determined to make the most of it. When Elena finished reading, her eyes were wet. "This is beautiful, Sarah. I worked really hard on it. It shows. Would you mind if I kept this?" Sarah nodded eagerly and ran off to join her friends. Alexander appeared at Elena's elbow. "What was that about?" She showed him the essay. He read it, his expression softening. "We did this," he said quietly. "We did. From a contract neither of us wanted to something that matters." He pulled her close. Not bad for two people who started out as strangers. Elena leaned into him, watching the celebration continue around them. Children running through gardens that had once been off-limits. Families eating food prepared in kitchens that had served only the wealthy. Music and laughter filling spaces that had echoed with loneliness. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Anything." "When I first came here, I saw prison bars everywhere. Every rule, every expectation, every social obligation, it all felt like chains. And now I see what we built with those same chains. Structure that supports instead of restricts. Tradition that honors instead of stifles." She looked up at him. We took something that was meant to trap us and turned it into freedom. Not just for us, for all of them. She gestured at the crowd. Alexander kissed her forehead. You did that. I just followed your lead. We did it together. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the estate had quieted, they walked to the stables one last time. Ash was awake, watching them approach with those knowing eyes. Elena fed her an apple while Alexander checked on the other horses. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd signed Catherine's petition? He asked. If you'd left before we figured this out? Sometimes, but I think I always knew I wouldn't sign it. Why? Because leaving would have been the safe choice, and I'd spent my whole life making safe choices, trying to survive, trying to not cause problems. She stroked Ash's nose. I was tired of just surviving. I wanted to see what living actually felt like. And? Was it worth the risk? Elena turned to face him fully. Every single day. They returned to the house hand in hand, passing rooms full of memories both painful and precious. The study where they'd had their worst fight. The entrance hall where she'd been arrested. The bedroom where they'd learned to trust each other piece by piece. All of it mattered. The hard parts, and the beautiful parts, and everything in between. 2 years after the wedding, Elena discovered she was pregnant. Alexander cried when she told him. Actually cried, which he claimed was allergies, but she knew better. We're going to be terrible at this, he said, hands shaking as he held her. Probably, but we'll figure it out together. Their daughter was born in spring, screaming her displeasure at the world with impressive volume. They named her Margaret, after Elena's mother, who cried happy tears for the second time in her life. The baby changed everything and nothing. The estate adjusted, nursery added, schedules shifted, priorities reorganized, but the core of what they'd built remained solid. The school expanded into a second building. The horse rescue program became well known enough that people traveled from across the country to learn their methods. Elena's education initiative inspired similar programs in other estates. On their 5th anniversary, they renewed their vows. Not because they needed to, the first ones had held firm, but because they wanted to choose each other again, publicly, in front of everyone who'd watched them survive and build and grow. This time, Elena wrote her own vows. I choose you, she said, standing in the same spot where they'd first married. Not because a contract says I have to. Not because circumstances forced me to. But because you've shown me what partnership actually means. You've let me be strong when strength was needed and vulnerable when vulnerability healed. You've built a life with me, not for me, and I will choose you every day for the rest of our lives. Alexander's vows were simpler. You turned my prison into a home. Thank you. That night, after the celebration ended and their daughter was asleep and the estate had settled into quiet, they sat in the garden where they'd once stood as strangers playing roles. Do you ever miss it? Elena asked. The control, the certainty, the walls you'd built to protect yourself? Alexander thought about it. Sometimes, when things are chaotic or uncertain, there's a part of me that wants to retreat to those old patterns, lock everything down, control every variable. But you don't. Because I learned something from you. Control is just another word for fear, and fear is no way to live. Elena leaned against his shoulder, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, their daughter slept peacefully. Somewhere on the grounds, rescued horses grazed in safety. Somewhere in the village, children who'd never expected education were learning to read, to write, to dream bigger than their circumstances. All of it had started with a contract, a trap, a desperate father's bargain to save himself by sacrificing his daughter. But Elena had taken that trap and transformed it, not through magic or luck or even love, though that had helped. She'd transformed it through choice, by refusing to be just a victim of circumstances, by demanding partnership instead of accepting possession, by building something real out of something that was supposed to be hollow. The contract that had bound her was ash now. Literally, they'd burned it on their first anniversary, watching the paper turn to nothing in a fireplace that had witnessed so many of their battles and breakthroughs. What remained was something stronger, something chosen, a partnership forged in fire and trust, a love built on seeing each other completely, flaws and strengths and everything between, and choosing to stay anyway. Elena? Alexander's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Hmm? Thank you. For what? For not giving up. On me. On us. On the possibility that something broken could be rebuilt into something beautiful. She took his hand, scarred fingers linking with hers the way they had 1,000 times before. You were never broken, she said. Neither was I. We were just waiting to find someone brave enough to see us as we actually are. And foolish enough to think we could make it work. That too. They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A daughter to raise, an estate to manage, programs to run, a world that still sometimes whispered about the Duchess who'd been arrested and the Duke who'd stood by her. But tomorrow was tomorrow. Tonight, they were exactly where they needed to be. Two people who'd survived everything designed to destroy them. Two people who'd turned obligation into choice, contract into commitment, survival into power. Two people who'd proven that love wasn't about perfection or control or meeting someone else's expectations. It was about choosing each other, flaws and all, and building something worth choosing. Elena Whitford had arrived at Ashton Hall as a commodity, a transaction, something to be evaluated and potentially discarded. She left that identity behind piece by piece, building something stronger in its place. Duchess, partner, mother, teacher, builder of second chances. But most importantly, free. Not because she'd escaped the trap, because she'd transformed it entirely, turning chains into choices and prison walls into foundations for something that mattered. The contract had stolen her future once. Now she owned it completely, and that, more than anything else, was the victory that counted.